All right. So yesterday, guys, we saw how functions are defined in Python, and then basically we also look at simple parameters, how we can pass parameters to functions. So today we'll be going in a little bit deeper into that and explaining some more concepts about functions. Let me get started. Control S. Let's call this function marks.py. Save. Okay, so you know how we explained in the last video that a function can take one or more arguments or parameters, as you may call them, and then print them, and then it uses those parameters as input to perform some certain action or task. Today we'll be looking at something. Okay, today we'll be looking at a concept called local and global variables, and basically let me just start with a simple example for you to understand what I'm talking about. So let's say we have a variable called username. It's equals to let's say all right, then let's say password is equals to password 123. All right, so now let's define a function. We want to define a function to let's define a function login. So let's say the function takes user name. You could name these parameters anything, right? You could name them, for example, you could name them just something like this, and then password, for example. So let's say this is just a simple login function. So we could do something like compare if username, just if the username parameter is exactly equals to, let's say and password parameter is exactly equals to password 123, then print, and let's print let's do something fancy. Login, let's say access granted, right? So let's say else print let's say access denied. All right, so let's run this first to see what happens when we go. Okay, so what I've done so far, let's run this first and see. Awesome, it's complaining that we have a mistake somewhere. Okay, the function. Okay, this is very interesting. So we define a function login, which takes two parameters: username, password. Now we didn't pass any parameter here. We didn't pass the username parameter, nor did we pass the password parameter. Look at what Python is reporting. It says type error, login missing two required positional arguments, username, password. Now this is really important. Understanding this kind of errors is really important because inevitably you have to make this kind of errors, but then what's important is you being able to see or read this kind of error and then understand what the issue is and then debugging and solving the problem. So what it's saying here is simply that parameters or arguments are missing. So what do? We just pass in those parameters or arguments. So we already have a variable called username that we've already defined. So let's say user name, and then we have another variable called password that will also define. So let's pass that. Sorry, oh, that was my bad. Say password. Right. So let's run this again. Okay, it says access granted as expected. So what about, let's say we have another variable called username one. Let's call this Tahir, and then password one. Let's call this password. So you know what we're saying here is that if the username is this and then the password is also this, that is, both of these conditions have to be met, then we are going to be granted access. Otherwise, access is going to be denied. So let's pass in let's pass in this arguments now to the function and see how it behaves. Now it says access denied, right? Because those conditions are not met. But what is really important here is that I want to introduce a concept called a concept of scopes, basically variable scopes in Python. So these variables here, username here and then username one, are what you call a global variable. That is, the scope of this variable is global to Python. That is, it's actually in the, you can just think of it as the global variable as a variable that's accessible anywhere. That is, from any point within Python you could actually access it and then call it. Whereas there's something called a local variable, and in this case, username here and this is username parameter and the password parameter here are actually local variables. And what I mean by that is that they are variables that are only available within the scope of this function. That is, outside this function, those variables don't exist. So if you kind of reference them, like try to call those variables outside this function, you won't, you will actually get an error. And let's try that. Let's see. Let's say let's just declare a variable here. Let's call it let's say let's say user, let's say function underscore username is equals to user name equals to username, and then function underscore password is equals to password. All right, so what we are doing right here is that we're saying we're defining a new variable, sorry, we're declaring a new variable username, that is this one, that is the parameter that is being passed to us via the function. We are defining it as, or declaring it here in this variable, and then same as the password also that is being passed, we're also declaring it inside this func password variable. So if, for example, we decide to say we want to print them out when after granting access to the user, let's say print func sorry, let's say print func username, print func password. I don't know whether you just heard what happened, but I had this gen running because there wasn't power supply this morning, so it was all everywhere in the background, and the power just came back, and so the noise just went down. So it's better this way. I don't know whether you haven't hearing it, but it's a terrible show. Okay, so let's see what happens when we run this with just the normal correct login details. Alright, you see, this prints out access granted, and it then prints out our passing username and password. But what happens when we attempt to print the same variables outside the scope of this function? Let's try to do that and see. Say print func username and print func password. Interesting. So what do we have here? It says you can see Python is raising an error already and saying name error. Func username is not defined. I just the code broke at this point at line 20 when Python attempted to reference the func username variable. It couldn't find it in the scope of the global variables, and therefore it reads an error, even though we've defined it within this function, or let me say we've declared it within this function. So what this is telling me is that all your local variables, all the variables that you declare from within the function scope are not available outside of the function. But then those variables that you declare outside of the function are actually still available within the function. That is, this variable here, that is the global variable here, is available within this function. So we could actually print it out and then it will still give you information. So for example, let's try something. Let's attempt to reference the username1 and password1 variables. Let's say print username username1 print password yes, password1. Okay, let's see what happens. Someone control. So let's remove this census. Let's break our code. All right, see what happens here. Username1 and password1 are still available within the scope of the function. So this basic idea, this is simple but really important, and you might come across situations whereby you're having errors in your code just because you've forgotten that you're referencing a local variable within, sorry, from outside its function. So what you need to understand in essence is that local variables, such as the variables that you that you declare in a function, are not available outside of the function. But global variables, such as the variables that you declare outside of the function within general scope of Python, are available everywhere within Python. So this concept is really important, and I think this brings us to the end of this video. See you in the next video.